Hey, hello, folks.
Oh,
Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you want to. And if you don't want to, also feel free. I am in Central Vermont. I live in Randolph. It's a town of about 4,500 people. And within, I think, maybe 5 blocks in every direction from here, there's actually other people on MetaFilter. Sometimes those people are people who were my friends first, and then they became MetaFilter people, and sometimes they're people who were people on MetaFilter who just wound up becoming adjacent to me, which is always kind of an interesting, weird thing. I think for a town of 4,500 people, we have mm,
oh,
15 people from MetaFilter, which is not bad at all, I think. I don't have like slides or anything because it just didn't really seem like a slides kind of thing. But what I wanted to do was, yes, there is a MetaFilter Mastodon. Yeah, MeFi.social, I think, and a whole bunch of people are on that. I'm on a librarian uh, Mastodon instance, but I'll keep half an eye on the chat too, but I'm also happy to, I've got a couple things that I wanted to like actually just say, and then we can talk if people have questions, and if people don't have questions, I'll keep talking. I have other stuff I can probably talk about. I just wanted to say thank you to the steering committee and specifically to the MetaFilter events crowd. This has been just, I was, you know, telling Aileen before, like, am I saying that right?
It's however you want to pronounce it. Fine.
Great. Um, but I was telling her before, like, it's just, this has just been a remarkable set of things to learn and people to meet and things that we could do. And man, the steering committee really got kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool here with some immediate fundraising needs, and you just showed up. And I just have to say, before anything else, I'm just incredibly grateful because this could have been a very different end of 2022. So just thank you so much. So a lot of you here I know in person, but not all of you. And, you know, you may or may not know me. And I wanted to give you like a brief introduction of who the heck I even am, and then talk a little bit about kind of my arc at MetaFilter, and then talk very briefly about, you know, a tiny amount of ideas I may have for the future. But one of the things I should really say at the outset is we're really hoping to move to kind of a community run model in general, which means not me. It doesn't matter what I think, except in like legal stuff and like making sure paperwork is done, I's dotted, T's crossed. But in a general sense, we're really hoping this steering committee, the next steering committee, future steering committees can be in a situation where they feel like they have more sort of ownership and agency over the way this community website runs, so that it's not just a new lady replacing the old dudes, it's just the community replacing the old dudes. So I hear you're recording this, but I suspect the people I want to be talking about won't be watching it. So with no further ado, I've been on MetaFilter since 2000. I basically showed up because I was not even a friend of Matt's, but kind of a friend of Matt's. I think I had like some local blogger. I'm like an old blogger lady. Like I'm 54. I'm in my mid 50s. Uh, thank you, Erin. My librarian look is strong. But basically, there was a whole bunch of bloggers. We all kind of knew each other. Matt was one of them. There were a bunch of of them. And a lot of us had our own individual blogs. And thanks to the miracle of RSS feeds, we all kind of kept in touch with each other. And when Matt started MetaFilter, where we could all like talk in one place, you know, a bunch of people kind of signed up, and it was interesting. I think somebody told me about it, and I got in early, and it was just a thing I liked. And when people ask me what it is, because I live in a not very online community, like in my real, like, well, this is real too, but in my meat space world, there's a lot of people who are like, what? I don't understand. Is that like social media? Is it like Facebook? Is it like, what is it? Like, why do you hang out with a bunch of people on the internet when you've got like people next door? And the thing I always sort of tell people is I like MetaFilter because it's people like me. It's extremely online people. It's people who get my jokes, which are extremely nerdy jokes. And it's people who are like awake when I am awake, which I'll be honest is not my real life neighborhood, right? Like in Vermont, a lot of the sort of sidewalks roll up at about 8 or 9 p.m. And I'm one of those people who's up till like 1 in the morning. And so it's nice to have people you can talk to who get my jokes and that kind of thing at whenever time is good, right? I always say people who are online, they're online, extremely online, are often online for a reason, whatever that reason is. And for me, I think a lot of it is like I'm super verbal. I really like talking, typing, reading, interacting. And I'll be honest, I need more of that than just chit-chatting with the people in my community can do for me. And my background is grew up in Massachusetts, went to Hampshire College, which, oh my God, Jim, you need to stop doing that. um, went to Massachusetts, grew up in Massachusetts, went to Hampshire College, which was kind of like a hippie college, no tests, no grades. You design your own major. I have a linguistics degree. I moved to Seattle in 1990 because that's kind of what you did then. And I went to library school in Seattle. And Seattle was where I lived when I started interacting on MetaFilter, basically. And that was also where a lot of sort of early internet people were, I guess. But like my background is all library stuff. It's all about wanting to connect people with information, but really kind of wanting to connect people with people. Like I like doing community stuff, but I also really like doing computer stuff. And so in Vermont, if you're really into computer stuff, normally you live near Burlington or one of the other kind of major areas. And I wanted to live in a rural area and work in a rural library. But the more I lived here, the more I realized being in a super rural area and being really good at computers is not like, they're not the same. Not that our librarians aren't, some of them, good with computers, but being somebody who was extremely technological meant that you weren't going to run a tiny library in the middle of nowhere, because you also had to be good at programming, building maintenance, a whole bunch of stuff that I wasn't really good at. And so, MetaFilter was my nerdy online home. Librarianship was kind of my chosen profession. But there was kind of a weird schism there. And as I spent more and more time on MetaFilter, and Matt and I were friends by that point, it became clear wanting to do something like that was what I wanted to do. And at first, for people who haven't been around MetaFilter since the hippie days, like it was just Matt. Like Matt was just the guy. And if Matt wasn't awake, there was nobody running the website, right? And if you wanted to delete a comment or a post or do something, you had to like get under the hood and get in the code. And yeah, Matt like was posting all the time, stuff that he was really interested in. PB came on to help with coding. PB did kind of what Frimble does now, more or less. Like PB's a little bit more kind of designy, I think, than Frimble, but basically that. But I was always like, hey, like if you need help, let me help. And like Rebecca Blood, who was a sort of big time West Coast blogger person, was like, oh, sometimes Matt goes away on vacation and he needs someone to help him, moderate or keep an eye on the place so that it doesn't catch on fire while he's gone. And she had been doing that. And I had mentioned to him, oh, hey, I'll do that. And he's like, great. And so he would occasionally go on vacation, be away, do something like that. And sort of over time, he was like, oh, it's actually kind of great to get to leave the site, like go away and not think about it for a while. I love that. And I was like, you know, I like that. You know, yeah, Romy mentions like PB did invent the permalink because he worked at blogger.com before they were bought by Google. Fascinating, fascinating. And he's so like understated about it. Like he could just go on like a world tour being like, I'm the guy who invented the permalink, and does not for whatever reason. And so, you know, I started kind of helping Matt, and this, I don't know when this was, 2005, probably 2006, started helping out. And at the time, I had a job in a public library in Rutland, Vermont, where I was a community outreach person. So I was trying to get people to come into the library. And the biggest challenge we had, and many of you may be familiar with this issue with some libraries, is we get people to come into the library, and then depending who they talk to with the library, people were either really cool to them or really like, you know, not as cool, basically. And so, you know, I sort of realized that like outreach in and of itself wasn't just getting the people in the door, it was making a nice place for them once they got there, which was essentially a thing that was true for you know, libraries, but I think is true with a lot of online spaces. So the idea of community engagement, like once people are there, what keeps them there? What makes them happy there? What makes them want to be there, want to help, want to continue, want to, you know, meet people or whatever. And I'm aware that for some people, MetaFilter's just literally like, look, I just type it on a screen. I don't feel like meeting you people. I just want to do my thing. And for a lot of other people, it's a way to connect. It's a way to interact with other people, get to know them, spend time with them, do projects with them, be in relationships with them, hire them, whatever the thing is. And it's kind of okay, in my opinion, that those sets of people coexist as long as everybody's kind of clear about what they're in it for. So over time, I was working at the library. I was volunteering at MetaFilter. Matt kind of was like, I can just send you some money. And that was sort of our relationship for the next like 6 or 7 years, where there was just kind of a random amount of money you got paid that Matt arbitrarily decided. And these were sort of what I would consider to be the not sure what's the opposite of the lean years. Like the site made way too much money, and Matt was having a hard time figuring out what to do with all of this money. If you
The
remember
salad day.
salad days, thank you. If you remember P. Jern, one of our beloved departed me fights, like he got bit by a spider and had some weird spider bite and was in the hospital, and like Matt paid his emergency room bill. Like he was just sort of making it rain randomly for random people, which was lovely, but also odd, especially thinking back on it now. And so over time, like, you know, we hired, yeah, the greasy times, so true. But over time, more people came on, right? Josh Cortex came on, Jeremy Restless Nomad came on, Lobster Mitten, Taz, Eyebrows McGee, Good News for the Insane, Time, Loop, Trimble. I think that's everybody. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. Oh my gosh. But basically, everybody has come on and been hired, and that could be yeah, the Midnight Mod. And in some very real ways, like nobody's ever really left. Like even though Josh is kind of like, you know, moved on as owner, he's still around. We see him in the Slack. He occasionally shows up and makes like LOL, not my job jokes, which are only sort of funny, but like, you know, he's on the website more, that he's in charge less, and I'm happy for him for that. And so I went to see a presentation that Matt did at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, about MetaFilter. And this was like during the salad days, like Matt, PB, Josh, and I all got a like apartment together in Austin during this time. Matt paid for it. We all got iPhones. Like it was a little bit wild. And I saw Matt give a presentation about MetaFilter. And if you guys know Matt, like, Matt was the big brain behind the idea. He was great designer. I mean, I say was, like, he died, but like, he had like many sort of great ideas, did a lot of great stuff, but he often wasn't involved in sort of the nitty gritty day to day, especially sort of over time. He was in his own hobbies. He was really interested in PVR blog. Yeah. During the 10-year party, he was just like, just send me a bill. Right. Exactly. I remember that. Meanwhile, me and Josh, had our kind of like spots. Josh was a little bit more in MetaFilter. And then as Ask MetaFilter became really the big kind of revenue generator, just in terms of advertising and etc., that was my spot, basically. I was happy there. It made sense to me as a librarian. Like, it just seemed to me to be the natural outcropping of sort of librarian stuff, basically. And Matt gave this presentation at South by Southwest and basically was like, yeah, it's great now. MetaFilter is such a big deal that like I take weekends off. And at this point, we were all working sort of always. Like, you'd have a phone in your pocket and, you'd take a look and see what was going on. We didn't even have a flag queue. You'd just be kind of reading the site. And Josh and I were both like, you take weekends off? What? I don't take weekends off. And so this was the point at which I was like, all right, Matt, we need schedules. And that was kind of what I perceived to be the beginning of MetaFilter going from like one guy's hobby site and just money that kind of randomly flew around to a workplace where people could go and have a job, right? And I don't mean a job in kind of a crappy way. I just mean a job in like a professional way, right? We had health insurance. We had like an HR company that was like an outsourcing HR company. We had a schedule and you didn't have to work when it wasn't your schedule. And one of the things the steering committee is unfortunately having to sort of dig through with this was because it was just Matt's thing, and Matt had like, tax advice and a lawyer and stuff. A lot of what his advisors told him was like, do as much stuff as you can, like with your MetaFilter money, so that it can be tax write-offs, right? And so some of the stuff we've been finding out, like literally in the last 6 months, has been like, MetaFilter was paying for Matt's what? And, trying to untangle that. And it wasn't as much nefarious as it was just the idea of being like some guy's hobby site. And then Josh kind of, Cortex, inherited the hobby site, but because him and Matt lived near each other, and him and Matt were friends, maybe strong, but like, they knew each other and knew the same people and traveled in some of the same circles. Many of the things that Josh kind of inherited with the site were still kind of Matt's. And Josh was like, whatever. It was Matt's hobby site, now it's my hobby site. So if you're here to meet me, one of the things that it may be worth knowing is this isn't my hobby site. Like, we love Matt very much, love Josh very much, but the next step, in my opinion, from professionalizing from, we have schedules, awesome, to it's not anybody's hobby site, is actually sort of moving to the point where the money all makes sense, it all tracks. I mean, it's still like a tiny business with just a couple employees and some small expenses. And you've probably seen the financial reports, or if you haven't, they're open now and you can just read them. Part of what we want to be doing is making it so other people can drop in, look at what's going on, and sort of make their decisions. And so, yeah, I think what Rayomi says in the chat is really true, that there was a blur between personal and professional. No big deal. There's like there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it's a different way to be. And I think Josh really got stuck in Matt's hobby site mindset, and also just dealing with a bunch of crap that still had Matt's email address on it that the two of them would have to coordinate. We still have an old PayPal account that like belonged to Matt. It's ridiculous. But like, maybe it's not as ridiculous as that, but like, you don't know, right? And so steering committee has helped untangle that, because Josh, in order to untangle it, would have had to have had some difficult conversations that I think were not comfortable for him. And the poor man inherited this site right before the Trump years and right before COVID after that, right? The worst possible times to try to be running a community site with a bunch of extremely verbose nerds, right? And I say that in the nicest way, and me too, right? I don't mean other people. Oh yeah, and right after the adpocalypse, because while advertising used to just bring in more money than Matt could spend, it started teetering off. And one of the reasons I actually moved on from MetaFilter when I originally moved on in 2014 was, on the staff side, we kept being asked to like tighten our belts, take pay cuts, do a whole bunch of stuff, which is fine. A business owner can ask that. But at the same time, Matt was afraid to talk to the community about the problems. And so he was just having a difficult time sleeping, telling us all to get paid less. And it just seemed unworkable, right? So this was right before Fanfare. Meanwhile, they're creating Fanfare, which I love, and I would love to see Fanfare just explode, because I feel like there's this huge internet hole left when Television Without Pity stopped being around, and it would be really cool to have a place that was really thrivey for discussing television. And I think the reason, and movies and books and games, I think the reason it's been a little hard with Fanfare is because the design doesn't lend itself to finding and discovery as much as maybe it could. Different question, community can decide, but that's sort of my whole thing. So I moved on in 2014 because Matt was afraid to go to the community and talk about money. And then I left, and then Matt went to the community to talk about money. And of course, everybody was like, oh my gosh, like, of course, like, we love this place. We will help. We will do the stuff. And, it stuck around. MetaFilter stuck around. And then Josh, to his credit, because Josh is like my kid brother in some ways. I like to smack talk about him a little bit, and some of it is pointed, but most of it really isn't. He's a lovely person, and he's like my internet kid brother. And to his credit, I moved on, and about 10 months later, Matt decided Matt was moving on, which was surprising. And then he was like, Josh, I'm going to give you the site. And like, there was some public communication that was like, he sold it, but he did not sell it. Like, he just gave it to him. Similarly, it got given to me, but Josh called me up like on vacation and was like, I just want to talk to you about this and make sure like it's okay. It's kind of weird for both of us. And how do you feel about it? And I was like, better you than me. Hilarious, right? So cut ahead 4 years, 5 years. I think Josh is an exceptional moderator, and he's not as good at like running a business. And to be honest, I don't think he really wanted that. I am like decent at moderating, I think. But also I'm really good at like the bullshit paperwork that's involved with actually having to run a business, right? Doing all the lawyer crap, being like, it's the end of December, we got to get the 1099s out. Like all the stuff that's like less fun, but needs to happen. I'm not as bad at that. And so Josh had been struggling for a while, and I'd been like talking to him on the phone, being like, helping him kind of figure out what he wanted to do, right? And some coaching, but just like, hey, I'm your friend, and I also know MetaFilter, and we love MetaFilter, but also something's got to change because you're not doing the stuff that needs doing. What can we do? Because like, we saw what was going on in MetaTalk, right? Like lots of people were talking about and really wanting stuff to happen. And there was some vague, yeah, we're gonna do it, but there wasn't that what I call kind of the clipboard holder being like, you said 2 weeks ago you were gonna do the thing. Where are we with the thing? And like it's a specific skill. I'm not, I'm pretty good at it. There's other people who are really good at it. Some people on the steering committee are really good at it, which is so great. And so trying to sort of figure that out, what was going to work for Josh, what was going to work for the site, how we were going to deal with this at the same time as ad revenue is continuing to decline, was the real challenge. And Loop has been wonderful. They've been great at sort of managing day-to-day stuff, and they and Josh were, talking a lot about, what the plan was. Loop has some other jobs working with other businesses. I don't know as much about that part of their life, but Josh had kind of worked out a thing with Loop being like, well, maybe they can run the day-to-day, dealing with paychecks, dealing with staffing, dealing with who's going to be here, talking to Frimble, etc. And, me, Jessamyn, I could do the paperwork because I don't mind being like the buck stops here person. I don't mind being the sort of responsible person. I don't mind like getting up in front of people and being like, this is what's been going on. And so over time, and this was earlier this year, we really tried to hammer out a thing that we thought would work. And then we had the transition team, who I don't know if anybody here was on the transition team, but they were great trying to figure out how to get from where they were, which was, I don't think I'm being super uncharitable, but like a real bottleneck where everything had to go through Josh. And it was hard because Josh was just having a hard time, I think, achieving escape velocity for some of the stuff that needed to happen to a different situation, right? To where we could have a steering committee, to where the website could be really more community led, right? Because that was always the thing with Matt. It's a community website, but like, is it if like only one dude has the passwords to everything? And I think but it's hard to move on from that. I mean, as a great example, we've been getting everybody's feedback about the banner, right? It's too small, it's too big, it's too long. And occasionally people reach out literally to me directly, like, I know you're not really in charge of this, but since you do own the site, and my reply is basically like, it's a community-driven website. We're doing the best we can, but sometimes having the community be in charge means different people have different opinions about the best way to proceed, and sometimes you just have to pick, and by you, I mean not me, other people. And sometimes part of the community-driven website is going to be being comfortable with the fact that it's not necessarily going to be the way people want it. And it's been hard because there are accessibility issues that we have to take actually seriously, besides being like, oh, you just need to sit with your discomfort. Like, that's not true, or shouldn't have to be true with accessibility issues. And we're learning how to kind of lump forward with that. So that's where we were over the summer. In May, I was like, all right, like, let's do it. That'll be cool. In September, MetaFilter, as owned by Josh, finally got dissolved because of paperwork reasons and Josh time frame reasons. And then we registered MetaFilter in Vermont. It's an LLC instead of a corporation. I don't really think that's it's almost a distinction without a difference, but legally it means slightly different things. And moving forward, we spend a lot of time in the Slack channel. I haven't been as hands-off as I was planning to be, mainly because at the time at which the transition finally happened in terms of ownership, we were also in a bit of a crisis mode in terms of funding, because normally August is fundraising month. but Josh was kind of in charge, but also the transition team was giving way to the steering committee. It was unclear who was going to be sort of in charge of that responsibility. We got started at a different time frame we might have chosen in a perfect world. It was fine. Hello, Pepper. And so sort of since then, we've been spending a lot of time in sort of close conversation trying to sort of plot a way forward. So a couple more things about me, just because I'm talking, and then it would be interesting to hear sort of from other people, and I could also talk about some other stuff if people are interested. But if you go on my user page, you know how they have those like the XFN things where you can say how you know somebody, they're your friend, they're your sweetheart, they're your muse, they're your whatever. If you look at all the people that are marked as colleagues on my page, those are all people who are library people, library workers, trained in librarianship. They used to work in a library, whatever, and there's about 400 of them. And I'm very excited about that because I love feeling like it's a place for librarians in addition to everyone else. And I've also, if you go to that page, I've also met, if I'm keeping actual track, about 733 actual real life MetaFilter people, which I just feel, I'm not sure if it's a record, but it might be a record. And it's, you know, it's very exciting. But I also tell everybody, like, if you're ever coming through Central Vermont, like, come by and sit on my porch, and you know, we'll have coffee or a beer or a cup of tea, and I'd be happy to kind of show you around. So I don't know how much people are interested in knowing about me versus knowing about MetaFilter versus just asking about one another. Like, I definitely have some opinions about direction, but I also want to stress that unlike in the past, those opinions are just more or less opinions, with the exception of like legal stuff, which is slightly less opinions. In my dream world, I can mostly do paperwork and stay the hell out of the way and show up as kind of an elder statesperson who's been here since 2000 and be like, whoa, back in my time, you know, Matt was the guy. And, you know, it'll warm my heart to have there be sort of a future MetaFilter where, you know, people are still chugging along, talking to each other and Ask MetaFilter, sharing their stuff in projects, hiring each other in jobs, making music together on music, talking in fanfare about the stuff they love about TV, sharing links on MetaFilter and asking questions and Ask MetaFilter, and having those people just be like, who's Matt? Who's Cortex? Who's Jessamyn? Like, I'm not here because of anyone's cult of personality. I'm here because this is a place that I like to be on the internet, and the people who I care about are here, basically. So happy to chit chat more. I didn't want to have a bunch of slides and just kind of talk about me, really. But there's at least a couple, old mod yells at clouds, Karen. So there's at least a couple questions in the chat that I'm happy to sort of pick up, or I don't know, John, if you were gonna specifically keep track of them. Either one of which is fine with me, but I'd be happy to talk about things that specifically people would like me to talk about.
Would you like a question right now then?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, Mott Given asks, how does Ask MetaFilter differ from Ask Reddit?
Well, it's interesting. It comes probably as no surprise. I don't spend a ton of time on Reddit, but I did just subscribe to the pellet stove subreddit because I just got a pellet stove and I don't know anything about it. And it's in my house being very hot, and I felt like it was a place I should really go get some information about. And so I actually don't know that much about Ask Reddit. Like, what I know about Ask MetaFilter that I think makes it kind of specific, like I know Reddit, but I don't know Ask Reddit specifically, is Ask MetaFilter's got kind of a built-in taxonomy, which is that it's got a whole bunch of categories, and then also it's got sort of free tagging. Like if I know it's kind of funny to say, but if I were running MetaFilter, having the tagging feature be a lot more surfaced so that more people could use more tags in order to co-locate information would warm my freezing librarian heart. But oh yeah, Rome is like, Ask Reddit is definitely a little bit more chatty sometimes, or it can be. Ask MetaFilter really started with, you've got to have a question or a problem to be solved, although it's been opening up a little bit more. And surprise, surprise, the world hasn't ended. Like, it's opened up a little bit more. You can ask more questions more frequently. You can be a little chattier, and it does sort of ask people's experiences. Oh, right. Okay. I do know what Ask Reddit is now that I'm talking and reading what you guys are saying. Has anybody ever, or does this happen to you, or that kind of thing. Whereas Ask MetaFilter has always been a little bit more problem solving oriented. And one of the things, and I don't know, and somebody can say in the chat if other people have this sense of it. But for me, one of the things that makes Ask MetaFilter special is you kind of know the people in your community who are answering your questions, right? So like I ask questions there occasionally, not as much as I used to, but I'm anxious to get back in it. I kind of pulled back. People who listen to the most recent podcast would probably hear I kind of pulled back from Ask MetaFilter, which is like literally my favorite place on the internet when we were having the financial crisis, because there was a huge financial crisis and I was a little bit afraid it wasn't really fair of me to be just at the helm of this maybe in trouble situation and also just continuing to hang out there as if there was no problems, right? I felt weird about it. And so I backed off for a while, and I'll have to like get back into it. But like part of it is, the people who are asking your questions or answering your questions. And so you can use the information that you've known about the people who are in your community. And again, some of us have known each other for decades at this point. So it's not just somebody answering your question, it's somebody answering your question either with a specific context of like what your life is about, because maybe they know who you are. Oh yeah, didn't you have that special situation 10 years ago that I vaguely still remember, and maybe that will help me give you advice about your current situation. But also, the people who are giving you the answers, so you can be like, I got a question about this and that. Oh, this person is showing up telling me I should try Linux, but they always say that. And so as much as that's probably good advice, it's also okay to know that that's the person who always says that. And I feel like that not only is helpful for building community, because the people. There's not that many people on MetaFilter when all's said and done. Whereas I often think of Reddit as very large, even though many of the subreddits are small and people are chummy in the same kinds of ways. And I also think the way there aren't, and this is just a MetaFilter versus Reddit thing generally, and I don't mean to be crabby about it, it's just a difference and people have opinions, but like no threading, no upvotes, right? And regardless of how you feel about them, they're big differences that I think really changes how people experience the site, right? Our thing on MetaFilter has always been like, everybody needs to talk to everybody. And like, that's the good news, bad news of MetaFilter, to be honest, right? There are some people I don't want to talk to on MetaFilter, if I'm being honest. I don't want to hear what they have to say. I don't want to talk to them. It's a short list, but it's not zero. You know what I mean? And I think for a lot of people, that list is longer. Threading, I think, can help solve that problem, but I think it can also introduce different problems. And again, I'm not talking about changing anything. I'm just talking about kind of what's true about it. And the upvoting, downvoting, granted, we have favorites. Matt occasionally has said, He thought it was a terrible mistake calling them favorites, whatever. It's water under the bridge from, oh my God, 15 years ago. But, you know, we have favoriting, but like if you're a person who favoriting makes you anxious, you can turn the favorites off, right? And then you don't have to see them. If it still makes you anxious that they exist, that's difficult, but there are some tools in place to help make that less problematic. And then all we have is flags, right? There's no public sort of downvoting. There's no, other than favorite, public upvoting. And so everything stays chronological. You can make your argument that maybe chronological isn't the best for stuff. I think for fanfare, it's sometimes a problem because who cares what the last movie people are watching together is? What you care about is like, where's the action, right? Where are people talking about stuff? You know, if there's a, I don't know, Game of Thrones, nobody's watching that. What's the Star Wars thing everybody's watching now? Arbo? What is it?
Andor.
Good
Yeah.
Lord. I'm the worst. Or White Lotus, right? What you want to know is if people are talking about the show you care about, right? But MetaFilter's just like, nah, chronological. You get chronological and like it. And maybe there's a thing that can change in the future because we've gotten better at removing that the cortex bottleneck, but we still have a little bit, Arbo, yeah. We still have a little bit of the Frimble bottleneck, and we've got a code subcommittee of the steering committee that's actually been able to like make patches, commit code, do stuff. Like it's amazing watching it. I never thought I would see the day, if I'm being honest. But there's still a little bit of room to move. They can't do like big designy things particularly well yet, and there's kind of a core of the way the site chugs along in cold fusion. Like you tell people you work on a cold fusion site and they just laugh in 2022. Just, oh my God, hilarious. It's the funniest joke in the world. So yeah, there's a little bit of room there. But so I think, you know, the Reddit versus MetaFilter community size, upvotes, threading, and also are you talking to people you already know, or is it just kind of a, hey, anybody can contribute and participate kind of thing?
Do you think
Okay,
that there are any other any other like sites? Like I know like back when MeFi first started, there's like a whole blogosphere out there of sites like it, and that's kind of died on the vine in the last few years. I just wonder if there are any other sites like MeFi that you think are still around that you think are something that we could like take lessons from, how they've handled the transition.
Well, the question I always ask people, like MeFi, but like the question I always ask people, like MetaFilter people when I meet them, because like sometimes you go to meetups and everyone's like blah, 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 blah. But sometimes you go to meetups and there's a lot of people kind of staring at their phones because we're not all the most socialized people in the world, right? And like no shame in it, but sometimes it's good to have icebreakers. And like one of my icebreakers is often like, well, where else do you hang out online? Because for extremely online people, there are a lot of like places you hang out online. So for me, like my online places are like MetaFilter and like my internet trivia league, where I'm currently getting my ass handed to me because I'm actually not as good at trivia as I think I am. But like it's fun, right? And there's a forum. There's like a message board. And like Devil's Rancher, Chris Vreeland, who's like a friend of mine on the site, he hangs out on MetaFilter and like a spelunking site, like for cavers. That's where he likes to be. And so one of the sort of the lessons that I get from asking those questions to other people is for a lot of people, and it's hard to feel this because I do feel like in some ways the technology is what makes MetaFilter special, but in some other ways, the people who cohere around shared interests and ideas are going to make it work no matter where they are. And I think that's true in the opposite way too, right? Like I remember when Quora first started and we were all like, fucking Quora, bleh, it's so, bleh, you know, like it's got like a bunch of like kind of startup-y types and kind of Bay Area, like VC, Paul Graham, Hacker News types. And I think there was a lot of MetaFilter that was instinctively like, meh. But I also think like Quora's technology kind of undid it. In not undid it. I mean, it's still got some there, and the people that are happy there are happy there. But I think for outsiders, I mean, now they just want everybody to log in, which is a pain in the ass. But also, there was no dates on the post, so you could never figure out what was new and what was old. Like Yahoo Answers existed for a while, and we all saw like the weird low quality of how is Babby formed nonsense that sort of showed up there. What I really feel is that sort of social media has meant that we're seeing, and like there's a million MetaFilter spin-off sites, right? There's 9622, there's 14, fuck, what was the one I belonged to? I don't know. There's a bunch of Slacks, there's like Crone Island, there was Monkey Filter, there's Sports Filter, there's, I'm sure, MetaChat, I'm sure I'm forgetting like a million like other tiny MetaFilters, but I feel like there's a lot more places that are not as concerned with the technology, but it's got the people in it who sort of share what you share. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting for MetaFilter over the last, like, I don't know, 5 years, 7 or 8 years, is figuring out who those people are, right? Like, it's extremely online people, it's nerdy people. Like, what else do we share? Right? I feel like it's slightly older than like the average social media sort of age. Often it's people who communicate in a lot of different ways. I think I Am Kim I Am did a big like PhD level thing about kind of what makes people, I think it was her. I mean, she also did the how we pronounce the name of the site thing. But, you know, one of the things that they found in general about social media is, you know, the people who like to communicate a lot are the people who like to communicate a lot, regardless of where that is, right? A lot of people on MetaFilter are also really active with each other on Twitter, or they're also really active on a lot of little discords, especially. You know, we're seeing Mastodon and people reaching out with Mastodon and seeing how that works for them. But like for Q&A sites, and to be fair, I don't reach out much because like I found what I needed, so I'm not looking anymore. But I feel like there was an arc, right? There was like Google Answers existed for a while. There was a couple other things back when people were like, oh, this is how we're going to get that like Google advertising money going our way. And now it's more like people just kind of found where their people are and they kind of like stay there, right? Like there's Reddit Ask a Scientist, right? It's cool, but it's very kind of small and within its own niche. And I think there's a lot of the people that probably only hang out there. They're just not even Redditors sort of otherwise. But they found their little space and they're there. Like the Trivia League that I hang out in, which again is where I comment slightly less than I comment on MetaFilter, but I'm there a lot. It's like one of those awful UBB forums. It's terrible. Like the user interface is the worst. I have to put a picture on Imager if I want to put a picture. I mean, I guess we have to do that on MetaFilter too. But like, it's terrible. But my people are there and we talk about nerdy trivia things, and so it only kind of matters. And so it's always interesting talking to people, especially in, you know, this decade, who are looking at trying to start up a new site and kind of growing a community, how much it really matters what the user interface needs to be like, or the features or the tools, and how much it just is about engaging your community, whatever that is. Oh, is MetaFilter mostly US people while Mastodon is heavily European? Sorry, I'm just reading along with the chat now. You know, I don't have much of a sense of it. I get the feeling that Mastodon works well all over the world because it's a lot easier to interact in your own language if your own language is in English, and find your people who can interact in that language as well. It's easier to filter by language. I've never done that much on Twitter. I don't get a vibe that Mastodon is specifically European. I mean, does anybody else have? So the tool is originally European. Hey, look, Boncliffe kicked himself out and now he's back in. Hey. So yeah, I don't know about Mastodon. That's very interesting. Oh, and for people who we didn't mention it before, you moved upstairs. For people who didn't, I don't know if we were here before, there is a Mastodon, a MetaFilter Mastodon server at mefi.social. And if you get in touch with user this is here in the podcast is when you realize I don't know how to pronounce anything. Pronoyak?
I think it's Pronoyak.
I think it's Pronoyak. Thank you. I believe they is the one who runs that and can get you a sign up, and the name is spelled out in the chat if you want. So another question?
Sure. Just a second. Lynn asked, how was it decided that Jessamyn would become the site owner?
I think literally no one wanted that job, to be perfectly honest. Like, I don't mean it in like a negative kind of crappy way, but like the site was, when I took it over, losing money slowly, or at least we thought it was losing money slowly, and it looked like maybe it was losing money a bit more rapidly than I had been led to believe. And Josh was just kind of looking to get out from under, because I think, you know how you talk about like with a house, there's like deferred maintenance, kind of like, I haven't really been keeping up with the basement or the roof or the thing. I feel like MetaFilter had some deferred maintenance, and I feel like we collectively as a site, but I think specifically as site owner, Josh had been like, oh yeah, I'll get to that eventually. And at some point it became clear to him he wasn't going to get to it eventually. He was having trouble, and the site was a business and it employed people and he had a responsibility. And so, you know, part of what he was doing was really sort of casting about, looking for a plan. And I was a person who stepped up and was like, I guess I could help. Like, and part of it is, you know, I'm in a fortunate position in my life. Like, I am sort of part-time self-employed, so I have a little bit of free time that I can actually work on this without it being like a huge, like, I can't feed my babies kind of situation. Also, I have sort of deep knowledge of MetaFilter. Most people on the site don't hate me, which is great. Like, just, you know, combination of luck and I don't know. I have like two sort of jokes, one of which is like, I'm very good at moderating because I had a very difficult family. You know, like I spent a lot of time trying to like make sure my parents weren't shitty. They were just not great. But I think I spent a lot of time being like, let's try and make sure everybody's like not pissed off. And I feel like those skills are good at helping grumpy internet people get a little less grumpy. You know, I don't have a lot of ego in MetaFilter, which is kind of weird because I have a position that you would think I would. Oh, and then my other, this isn't a joke at all, it's gossip. When Matt handed off the site to Josh, one of the steps that was involved in that was Matt undoing, almost selling the website to some fucko businessman who nobody knew, because Matt, in order to get out from under, Matt had a whole bunch of like kind of glad-handing internet buddies who were more like, you should get some money out of this. You've been working on it for so long. And like, sure, right? But like a community website, as opposed to just like, I don't know, your cast iron pan review website that you built up from scratch on your own, it's kind of different selling the community to some fucko businessman as opposed to selling your cast iron pan review website. And so when Josh was like, oh yeah, I'll sort of take this over, Matt was like, but I already promised to sell it to some fucko businessman. And I was sort of loosely involved just because I knew all those guys to like make that not happen. But it's not like MetaFilter's like a lucrative property where you could be like, it's for sale, top bidder. You know, it's not, no one wants that now, because you can't just run ads down the side and sell it to people. I mean, maybe you could, but there aren't people like knocking at the door in order to do that. And that's okay. Like, it's super okay. We just want to like keep the lights on, keep people paid. It's nice if it can become a thing that is a job for people. I feel really good that MetaFilter has longtime employees who get paid reasonably. I wish they were still getting health insurance. I wish everybody still had a free phone. But whatever, the world changes, right? But being able to, help run a thing that provides jobs for people and a corner bar hangout for, or whatever your metaphor is, for a lot of people, like that has huge value in a world where people are getting increasingly dissociated from one another. And I sort of like that. So the decision, because it was just one guy's hobby site who gave it to another guy, and then that guy just couldn't figure out kind of what to do with it. Like, Josh basically got to make that decision. And in my dream world, MetaFilter kind of becomes a place where I don't get to be the person who then just makes that decision later from now that it shouldn't be mine anymore in order to be able to do that. Because Josh also could have sold it to a fucko businessman, right? Theoretically, with the structure we have now, technically, legally, I could do that, but like realistically, culturally, the site isn't in a place where that kind of thing could happen, and we're better for it.
Okay, next question. Ouroboros asks, can you talk a little about how the structure of the organization allows and protects community independent self-governance? Is that parse? I guess community independence and self-governance.
I think my question was something different, but I saw that question fly by in the chat too.
Oh. Maybe I misattributed it. Scrolling up. Well, I'll go ahead and ask your question, Ouroboros. Is that how you?
Yeah, it actually relates to what you're saying. Have you, no shade to Matt and Josh, and I would understand if the answer to this is no, I haven't had a chance to think about it yet, but have you guys done any succession planning for you yet? So, because the plan the last two times seems to have been just like burn off and just like give it to whoever will take it kind of.
Yeah, I mean,
let's have any thoughts?
My thought is basically like two things, right? I just rewrote my will, and technically, because legally someone had to take it over and I took it over, like right now in my will, if I drop dead next week, I'm leaving it to Matt because I have a sick sense of humor. But realistically, and I'm sorry everybody, but he would do the best he could. But there's a steering committee now. Realistically, if I got to choose, and I don't, right? Like it's a steering committee thing. I feel like we should explore looking at, potentially some sort of cooperative ownership where we share not only the responsibility, but we share the risk. Because right now, technically, awkwardly, if something ugly happened and we had some giant lawsuit that cost a fortune, like it's an LLC, so I'm protected a little bit and I'm not afraid. Like I'm not worried. But like, it's weird to have one person who's like, oh, I'm not in charge, realistically be still the point person for legal stuff. I know we've talked about being a nonprofit. I'm not even going to go there because I know it's such a salty space for people. But I think the steering committee, in conjunction with me, in conjunction with some of the staffers, can really talk about ways of potentially having the ownership be shared in a way that is legally real and not just sort of, oh yeah, everybody gets to have feedback, but then having only one person legally be able to make the decisions in writing my will. And I'm not dropping dead, so like, don't worry about this Matt scenario, but like in my will, one of the things my lawyer, who's a local Vermonty kind of crunchy kind of guy, was like, have you thought about a co-op? And I was like, well, it's not my decision, blah. And he's like, sure. But, I've helped a lot of places help set up co-ops and whatever. And it's a sort of particular structure in the United States for having everybody kind of buy in, and everybody knows like the Park Slope Food Co-op and like a whole bunch of bad co-op models where a whole bunch of hippies yell at each other all the time and you just do endless meetings and it's a disaster. But like something that allowed us to share that structure so that a succession plan didn't have to be, we either need to pry it away from somebody who doesn't want to give it up or can't, or nobody wants to be in charge and, you know, the whole thing turns into kind of a fiasco, is what we'd like to avoid. So to your question, no plan yet, but it's front of mind for me in terms of being a real thing we actually do something about. Like Josh's succession plan was leaving it to his wife. She is lovely, but it just wasn't a plan, right? And I think part of that's just wrapped up in, I think it's hard for a lot of people to think about the world without them on the best of circumstances, much less when you're dealing with, you know, a business situation that you're feeling weird about at all times. So kind of long answer, short question, but it is a thing we're thinking about, and it's important to me to have something real, not just, because I know people were hammering Josh about it, and I think that was actually a completely reasonable thing for them to be doing.
Okay, how about the question, I think it's from Stanzik, I think that's how you pronounce it, who asks if you can talk a little about how the structure of the organization allows for protects community. Isn't this what you just answered? I'm not sure. So yeah, is that the question that you were just answering? It seems.
Can you say it again or point me to where it is?
Okay.
I'll just unmute myself. Hi, Jessamyn. Yeah, I asked that question, so you don't need to answer it again. I think I got a lot of very useful and thoughtful information from what you just said and what you had said previously. But I did have a second question about what you had said about the site running on Cold Fusion. And that is, would it be useful to convert the site to actually update the site to something that might be a little cheaper or, I don't know, more flexible to administrate?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's sort of, I don't want to talk out of turn because we do have a code committee on the steering committee who, you know, pays attention to that kind of stuff. And I think once we're sort of done with fundraising / event / auction / holiday time in America, sorry, just reading the chat briefly. I do think it's the thing we will think about. Like, I think the short answer is, yeah, we'd love that, right? It would have more people who were able to help contribute code. It would make a lot more sense. I think there's been some discussion in MetaTalk about whether or not it would be cheaper, but we could certainly entertain the idea that it certainly might be. Like, you know, our biggest expense really is staff. But one of the things I think we found as part of fundraising and also just what I consider the fiscal responsibility era of MetaFilter is there were a lot of just unexamined expenses generally that we have now been able to scrutinize, and having a bunch of other smart people besides the smart people who are running the site looking at things like, you know, how much it really costs us to run the site on AWS, you know, Amazon's web services, versus how much we were paying, which was maybe 30% more than we needed to be paying, because we didn't start when money stuff started to be a problem looking very sharply at where all the money was going as quickly as we could have. But yeah, I think getting into like a programming language that people currently use this decade would generally be a great idea. Again, with the sort of community run thing, we're going to have to find some people who will do it. We may be able to pay them a little, but man, we couldn't pay them a lot. And so that does hamper what we're able to do. But yeah, I mean, it's on the table, and I would go so far as to say I think it's a good idea.
Those are all of the questions that I had logged. So if anyone has any other questions.
I think Willie Man has a question.
Yeah, Willie Man had his hand raised.
What are the chances that we just say fuck it and migrate MetaFilter to Discord? with a $5 Patreon join fee. I am kidding, but hey, it could be possible, if you think about it, but I assume the self-standing site will be here for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really accurate, right? I think at this point we have the community and we could go anywhere, right? However, we like where we are. I mean, I think there was definitely some concern, right, when they started up MeFi Social, the Mastodon instance, that it might suck away sort of community project goodwill and or money that wouldn't then flow to the site so that we could continue to keep the lights on the site, right? I mean, I think one of the biggest questions for future MetaFilter is, you know, how staffing works and how we pay for that, right? Because, you know, technically one of the things you see about Reddit, and sort of back to what we talked about earlier, is, you know, Reddit's almost entirely volunteer moderators, right? And I'm not saying this is where MetaFilter is or should be going at all. I love our paid staff and I love that we're able to pay them. But one of the things that makes us different from other sites is having paid staff, being able to pay them, having humans that answer your email and that are interactive with you. And so when we're exploring options, you know, one of the things you have to think about is, what does staffing look like in a MetaFilter in 5 or 10 years from now, right? What would happen there? And, you know, in my dream world, you bring in enough money through whatever sort of magic trick to continue to pay people for 24/7 staffing. But then the next question becomes, okay, if you couldn't do that, and it looks like we're good for now. Oh my God, thank you, everybody. But if you couldn't do that, what are other options to have MetaFilter still be MetaFilter, right? And like, you know, like Aaron Willyman says, like, you know, a $5 Patreon and a Discord server, you know, it's an interesting thing to think about. I don't like talking about it too much out loud because I don't want to in any way disrespect where we are now and the fact that I love this and wanting more of this. You know, I would like to employ more people. I would like to make so much money we could pay lots of people to do lots of things for us. That would be the best. But let's think about what, you know, other options are. And the one thing I don't talk about a lot, and I'm not going to talk about more than this, but like, I don't get paid. Like, I'm not asking to get paid. Like, part of my whole deal is my service to MetaFilter, as we're asking everybody to do something, donate, help, you know, be a cheerleader on the sidelines, like whatever your thing is. And for me, it's doing a bunch of stupid paperwork, showing up in the steering committee a lot, keeping Loop on task if they're trying to do too many things with a limited amount of time, that kind of thing. And, you know, that's my service. But I do think one of the things I'd love to see in like kind of near future MetaFilter is just having everybody ask themselves, like, what's your service? What's your service to MetaFilter? Like, chipping in money? Cool. Chipping in help? Cool. Taking on a task? Cool. Like, lots of different ways. But we do want everybody to think of the way they can help, not just the way they can show up, I guess. It's kind of weird to say that. I don't want to disparage anybody for the amount of effort they can and will put into this. But thinking about the extent to which you can and will put in, sort of thinking about that moving forward and how that contributes to what we can get out of it, I guess. I got paid a
And
lot
one
of money
comment.
for a long time. And so I feel back in the Matt salad days. And so I feel completely okay with this choice, but I don't think anybody else who's on staff should have to, you know, work without getting paid.
And one comment.
L-
Sorry for leaving distracting comments in the chat. I totally
fine.
was Mystery Science Theater 3000 your talk. Jay Harris liked it, but it's what I am known for. Snarky comments.
It's
Thanks,
fine.
Jessamyn.
Lynn has a question, if she would like to unmute.
Hi, it's so great to meet you and talk to you because I've been on Ask MetaFilter for several years, maybe since 2010 or something like that. And to me, you're kind of like, I've always kind of known about you, so it's really cool to meet you and talk to you. So this kind of relates to the previous question that I asked, which was, how was it decided that you would become the site owner? So it kind of went from Matt's hobby site to kind of Cortex's or Josh's hobby site. And I know it's not your hobby site now, but you're kind of like the face of MetaFilter to me right now. Maybe because you're like the site owner. So I'm wondering how that's going to change in the next few years, if and what your role will be in the next few years, or maybe you haven't thought about that yet. And you've kind of like touched upon that so far, but I'm just wondering like who is going to be the face of MetaFilter, and maybe there won't be one, or just kind of like who will like me fight and random internet people know as MetaFilter. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do understand you. And, one of the things Matt was actually really good at was he was happy being the face of MetaFilter. And partly it's because it was his, right? He made it. Like he made it from nothing. And so that was cool. Cortex was okay with it, but he's not naturally kind of a, let me get out in front of people and talk, right? He's a little bit more shy. He's a little bit less, I've talked about this in the past, but like my dad was also in technology and was briefly involved in a project that was briefly famous. And so I grew up with a dad who did technology, but who also talked to reporters and crap. And so was okay being like, well, let me tell you what I think about that. And being able to like soundbite things that were punchy and interesting that other people would want to listen to. And so I picked that up from him. And I think Josh didn't grow up in that kind of world and he's less comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with being the person if nobody else wants to be the person. But I think ideally we have like a steering committee. And I don't want to speak for the steering committee, right? But like we have a steering committee where different people on the steering committee have either temporary or semi-permanent, at least for their term, dominion over an area, right? So we could have somebody step up and be like, well, I'm on MetaFilter's code committee and this is what we're doing about, oh my God, getting us off of Cold Fusion, right? Or I'm on MetaFilter's auction committee and I'm going to talk about what our semi-regular auction things are, and that person could literally go to other media properties. Like when we did our MetaFilter gift guide, right? I say I had nothing to do with this. I just got to watch it happen and was delighted. We had some me-fights who, put together a press release, did a thing, talked to other websites as far as I was concerned, MetaFilter, right? Like there wasn't any like, oh, you really need to talk to Jessamyn. Like they put my name on the press release just because I was happy to be that person. And I think sometimes the world of tech especially, but media also, they really want there to be like a person in charge, preferably like some white dude who loves talking about himself. Like, you know what I mean? Like they expect it, we deliver it, and then it just keeps going like that. I would like to see lots of different parts of MetaFilter having people who are okay being, occasional, temporary, or quasi-permanent spokespeople for that part of MetaFilter. I'd like to see the BIPOC board have somebody who talks about the work that they've been doing, which has been good, I think. Like I have friends who are like, so you have this internet thing and how are you going to keep it from just being a pit of systemic racism like everywhere else? And I'm like, well, it's awkward because we do live under capitalism and in America, but we do have this BIPOC board that is trying to help keep the site from not being as bad as everywhere else, right? Help keeping the site honest, help keeping it true to our values, help our moderating decisions be in line with what we say our values are. And hopefully somebody from the BIPOC board can talk about that, whether it's one of our moderator members of the BIPOC board or whether it's not. It shouldn't matter. And yet part of that involves a change in society, not wanting to talk to like the white man in charge, and not just sort of a change in MetaFilter. But I do think, one of the things I've learned is being a librarian, I spend a lot of time on library Twitter, right? Talk to other librarians, library Twitter. I'm really sad at what's happened to Twitter because library Twitter was my love, right? But a lot of people will be like, oh, Jessamyn, you're like a well-known librarian with a blue check mark. What do you think about this? And I'll be like, well, why don't you talk to my other colleagues? Because maybe I've talked enough for today, this week, this month, ever. Like maybe other people can do a credible job, and maybe they're not all punchy soundbite like I am because I grew up with it. And maybe that's okay. Like it's preferable, it's desirable, it's what we want. But for that to happen, part of that change needs to be from me, just shutting up sometimes. And part of that change needs to be other people feeling like they have agency within MetaFilter to speak for MetaFilter. And I would like to kind of help encourage and mentor people to be able to do that, figuring out how to do it, right? Like it's awkward. I mean, because you think of like, who's the face of Reddit? Like the fucking guy, right? Who's the face of Hacker News? That fucking other guy. Like who's the face of Quora? Like the fucking guy. And like, I think it's weird enough that I'm like a lady, but also like, yeah, I'm still like a sort of middle-aged white person from America. And I'd like to see people expecting different faces, like different faces from MetaFilter, different faces from tech in general, different faces from sort of community organizations. And we have to, those of us who are overrepresented have to get better at shutting up, I guess. And the only reason I'm spending so many words talking about this is because this is my little 90 minutes. But other than that, that's what I aspire to.
Awesome, thank you.
And you guys have a meeting at 9, right? Or 9 Eastern Standard. So I don't want to presume. I don't know how.
Yeah.
9. We have, just there's a meet the steering committee
Yeah.
talk at 9.
I think we can
Exciting.
take like 1 or 2 more questions and then maybe wrap up.
Okay. If anybody
We're-
else,
we're- We're not gonna go like to the wire here. Any other
anybody else
questions?
wants to drop a note in the chat, or if we missed your question earlier, feel free to drop it in there.
Ooh.
I mean, what is this malt shop link? I can't click it without opening like a different browser.
It was the mock-up of what the website may have looked like if we
Oh,
had
with the
advertised.
trucks.
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Yep. We got a comment thanking you for your time.
Oh, I mean, thank everybody for their time showing up. Like, oh my gosh. Again, I cannot thank the steering committee enough. Everybody that has pitched in any way for our fundraisers, for our auctions, for the transition team. If you've donated money, if you've sent in, checks that I actually get to walk down to the bank, like it's been super gratifying and really helped me feel. I spent a lot of time this summer a little concerned I may not have made the right decision. And I do not feel that way anymore, which has been nice.
That's good. That's good. Well, Aylin.
Yeah. So
is-
I think we can maybe wrap up for now. And as a reminder, everyone, this session was free to attend, but we would love it if you could make a donation to MetaFilter now, because fundraising is still ongoing and every bit really does count. We are still tallying and trying to reconcile a lot of the numbers. I know some people have asked for a financial update. That's kind of where we are at right now. So really we're still fundraising, so it would be great if you could still, chip in if you've enjoyed this session, or if you feel like, yeah, now I understand a little bit more about what MetaFilter is
We also
about.
got merch. We got merch. It's
Yeah.
really good. I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
Ralmy shirt's so much better than the one I got. I got this one with the tiny little MF logo in the middle.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
thank you so much to everyone who came up today, and most of all, thank you to Jessamyn for doing this. I've loved just seeing how everyone has been interacting, and really it feels so much more like a community now. And yeah, so we have a short anonymous feedback form that will appear as you exit this meeting, and we'd really appreciate it if you could fill it out. It helps us to plan even better events for you, and if you have enjoyed this session, please feel free to post or chat about it on MetaFilter as well. So yeah, thank you for attending, and we can end here, I think.
So
Bye.
long
Thank
from
you
the
very
blue
much.
dimension. Sorry, didn't mean to talk over you.